Well, we've done enough farm management tours. I know this goes on and on and on and on and on. But they want you to finish up what? On time. So we shall try that. Thank you, sir. I am extremely pleased to be here, and I hope that you saw from Jay and from the director, are they still here, that they were, shoot, I'm up for a review. I was going to say some nice words about it. So I'm up for promotion, so I guess, and there's no sense in doing that, they're not here. It was interesting listening to Jeff, and he was talking about the bonds of the past. Did you hear that, ma'am? Is the past important? For a lot of young people, the past is not important. It is what is today and tomorrow, and that's still important in extension. What I want to do is share with you through pictures. And by the way, as you all know, and in fact, y'all is not a common Indiana word. I'm a Louisiana native, and that's the one word. Oh, Louisiana, very good. You know where Leesville's at? That's where I grew up at. You was a 4-H agent in Leesville? Boy, that was the pit of the world, wasn't it? But you're no longer there, is that right? I didn't think so, because you're only there. That is an Army base, so some of you don't know that. And so I got there because I'm an immigrant. I came from France, most of it. So I've had the opportunity and extension as an immigrant, come over on a boat, and people say, you got to be kidding me. No, my mother, my sister, and I came here on a boat, not being able to speak English, and my mother learned English doing crossword puzzles. Isn't that pretty cool? And so my whole English is all screwed up because I sort of blend French and English together like we all do. Like the word colonel. It's colonel, right? To my mother, it's colonel. And it still is today if you think of how the words sound. If you listen to Jeff talking about the past, and that's what we're going to do. This is not meant to be a picture of neat photographs, though they are. This is going to be going to a book that we're working on now. I am the pesticide guy. I deal in pesticides. I deal in mixing chemicals, spraying and killing. That's what I do for a living. And I love it. It suits me just perfect. But many, many years ago, I started asking, I am not from Extension. I always wanted to be in Extension because I learned this in graduate school. I like working with farmers. And I had that opportunity. And when I had a chance to finally make it into Extension, I was asking, so tell me more about Extension. And there was nothing written. So we've written some books. This is going to be pictures from the county agents took. In the old days, they wrote reports. If you've ever seen them and you complain about your reports, boy, you ought to see those reports. And so we'll start off here. It's sort of looking at the past and going to come to the future. As you know, 1862, land grant schools. This is where Extension starts. 1862, that was the northern states had it. The states like Louisiana did not get theirs until somewhere in 1896. That is when Congress said the Confederate States now could have their land grant schools. And then in 1994, I'm less familiar with this one. It's Native American land grant. Not as familiar with that. Don't have a lot of interaction there. But this is John Purdue. It's what the old man looked like. He bought Purdue for $150,000 and 100 acres of land. And he says, I'll give you that money if you name the school after me. And if you name the school after me, you have to have a law that says you can never change it. That's pretty clever. That's why he's a good businessman, right, David? And that's our first experiment station. It was the only building that we had. We also taught there. That's Purdue at the turn of the century. Again, you can see a lot of farm and stuff on it. What's important here, and what we've often is missed in all kinds of people, it's teaching and training the children of working class. Jay kind of mentioned that, did he not? Engineering, agriculture, home ec, military. And you can call your school whatever you want to call it. But ultimately, that's what these land grants were designed to do. In 1887, just a few years later, Congress passed another law, and that law was to do what, sir? Hatch Act, which was experiment station research. And so that was to be able to develop science to help the farmers, primarily, and the home. So let me ask you this. Why was that important? We didn't have, or home economics. I'm going to include the bigger picture. So this was actually developed, and this is actually Purdue. This is where, if you've ever been to Purdue, that's Lilly Hall today. Lilly Hall was right there as part of the farm. And by the way, everything that I talk about, you guys have in your states as well. There's nothing different, because one thing about it, if there's a good idea in our business, everybody takes it. I take yours, and you take mine. You give me credit, and I don't give you credit. That's how. Now, this research is extremely important. And you heard Jay talking about 400 experiments on the Purdue farms. What's the missing piece? I teach the kids. I have this research. What's the missing piece? What is it? Sharing. Now, how do we get that information out? You understand that nobody reads research papers. Is that correct? Nobody reads these bulletins like they used to do. It's mouth. Most of us learn by listening. So we came up with these winter ag schools. Farmers would come to us for 8 to 12 weeks, depending on the year, and they would focus on agriculture, livestock, dairying, and then in a few minutes you'll see home economics. We had no students. Why would you send your kids to Purdue when I already know how to plow? This is the beginning of science, folks. Everything that we talked about. And then as our research got really good, we started bringing in people from the association. These are the hogs, and hogs is a very important business in our state. These winter ag schools connected the people to the research. There's no extension agents. It's just bringing people in and our researchers. By the way, about this time, you probably only have 4 or 5 researchers. We didn't have 300 people. We had 3, 4, or 5, and that was it. Now, notice a change here, ag and domestic science. Our winter class, winter courses, began to offer this, and obviously you can call it what you want to. You can call it cooking. You can call it whatever the politically correct word is, but people out in the country, sir, were malnourished. It was a rough life out in the counties, and we're teaching people how to have nutritious kinds of foods and how to have healthy kids. Isn't that something? We're doing that today, are we not? Nothing changes. It's amazing. And so, and then how to do fabrics, how to use everything that you've got on the farm over and over. And so the role of women became pretty important here along with the farm stuff. Now, what the problem was getting Jeff, people had to travel to Purdue, right? But what about all those tens of thousands of people who could not or did not want to come? So we did something called Farmers Institutes. Folks, every state had them. USDA had a program, and we had Farmers Institutes. And what we did was, we didn't have any extension. We had no staff. So what we did, Debbie, was we would pay you $25 a week. And a week back then was 6 days. I would pick up your expenses of train and a horse and buggy because there's no roads. And you would be an expert, like one of the books we wrote is on Virginia Meredith. She was an expert livestock person. She owned her own farm, one of a couple of a dozen in the whole country. Can you imagine the 1890s being a woman going in front of men, tell them how to raise livestock? But the one thing about farmers, you show me how to make money, I don't care. I don't care if you're black, you're white, you're Hispanic, you're male, you're female, whatever. You show me how to do it, and she was real good at it. Well, these Farmers Institutes were set up for local. You had a local committee. We do that today. Local people. And so, man, what they did, the local people would say, we need something on hogs. We need something on beef cattle. We need something on home economics. We need something on whatever. And we had one guy who would bring all this together and ship you these individuals to meet. It's a simple little agenda, and I know it's hard to see with the light here, but domestic economy, lots of music. Lots of music. I don't know how we would go. I don't see a whole lot of food here. That's from my world. Why should a young man have higher education? A whistling solo. Now, don't ask, because there'll be somebody here who wants to whistle. Hog as a moneymaker, dairying, livestock. And so you can see Virginia Meredith here is talking about livestock farming, and she's also talking about homemaking. During that time, it was recognized by her that she could do both roles. She could be a professional woman and also be a mother, which I thought was pretty important in that sense, even back then. Why boys leave the farm and the rest of the stuff. Now, this was cool, right? Got them out. We took Purdue, and every university here went out through these farmers' institutes to go out. And so there is your county based. And I would bet you to tell you that if you want to see where your extension starts from, it starts from the farmers' institutes. It also is in Indiana at least, and I'm sure all over, 4-H comes out of here. This is where the 4-H programs come out of when you have the kids' competition. The idea was that towns are very isolated. We need to help people to improve their lives. Now, all this is going to overlap with the extension agents when they show up here. We wanted specialized courses, so when the equipment came in, they wanted our engineers to teach them how to repair equipment. We called them short courses. Again, all of you had them. Can you imagine going today and bringing in animals in some of these buildings? Can you see these animals here? I know the first question that Jason would ask, are we going to get sued? But back then, they didn't seem to worry too much. They just brought the people in, and we're focusing our attention on this one here. Out in the country, there are no roads. There's hardly any communications. There's very few medical people. And so here, what you have the ladies here learning how to basically take care of sick people. Isn't that right? Because back in the good day, you took care of your people because you didn't have either access and or money, mainly access to it. Specialized training is what they were trying to deliver. We got real fancy. We had the trains. Our first extension person actually came out of the research. The first extension was a guy named Christie. He was a Canadian. And Christie was hired in the experiment station that you mentioned, and his job was to try to expand this stuff out into the state. Well, he's a pretty aggressive guy, like a lot of these guys were, and he created his own empire is what he did. In a few minutes, he's going to create extension. Did any of you ever have trains that go through your state where you would make a stop and people would have a program? What state are you from? Kentucky. So what kind of train are you familiar with? Well, okay. All right, so there must be an HR policy on that too. All right, but what kind of trains were they you remember reading about? Yeah, in fact, here, yes, the trains came through, and Purdue had their specialist on it. And here, these men are learning about limestone. Limestone is very important. If your soil is too acid, you can't grow crops. So we're trying to get people here to know about limestone. Here we're talking about dairy cows and how to have a productive dairy cow and how much milk should she get and how much feed should you give her and how much money do you make? How many cows do I need? And you could see here the crowds were this was how we were able to get out and see more people. And again, we're doing that today with unique methods that we'll come up with. But you know what the bottom line was? We didn't have a presence in the county. And so the County Extension Service was created actually in the state of Indiana in 1912. Most of you will find out that what we're celebrating is the federal government's role. Our extension was in place not long, in our case, let's just say 1905 is our first extension real person, but 1912 is really the first hiring of agents. Anybody here from Texas? Okay, so in Texas, way back then, you called them farm advisors, Billy. And these men, and I don't know if they were women, but mainly men, were out there advising the farm. And you guys sort of hype this up, and like the federal government does, they also pick up on good ideas, right? And then they had a national program. The first 4 extension agents were hired in 1912 in this state. Sears Roebuck had money available. USDA had money available. And the local people had to put up $500 as well. Average salary, I think, was about $2,000, $1,800 for these folks. So 1912, a couple years ahead, is Harriet here? Well, actually, okay, let me ask it another way. Harriet works for Extension today. One of the first four county agents was a guy named Ralph Chitty. Ralph Chitty is her grandfather. Right? That is cool. Her grandparent was one of the very first of the four, number 2 actually, which is kind of neat because it really tells you we haven't been around that long. 100 years sounds like a long time. Jeff, you've been with Purdue. Have you hit 30 yet? Yeah, I thought so. So Jeff, you've been in Extension for about a third of this history. We haven't been around that long if you look at relationships such as this. Now, most of the agents we hired were college degree or this winter course. They were raised on farms. No question was out of bounds, which is kind of like today. My best one is, we call them educators now. An educator called me up and said, well, past this lady, lady says, can I thaw my turkey in the toilet? Any nutrition people? How would you answer that? I always say, why would you want to do that? I'm just kind of curious. Any reason why? What is it? If you put the turkey in the sink and you have to pull the stopper, and she goes through it, you put the stopper in, you put the turkey in, you add water, then you take the turkey out. Ma'am, I understand. What's that got to do with the toilet? She says, you just keep flushing the cold water out. I said, ma'am, you ought to patent that. That's a good idea. Now, there was a campus specialist. That's a true story. There's a campus specialist. We had a lot of them. Extension in the county and the specialist worked very, very closely together. The research was viewed as book farming. If you were any good, then you ought to be farming, not having one of these government jobs. And boy, I saw this book. I've seen this over and over up here. The agents really wasn't wanted. I don't need you to tell me how to farm. I've been farming for 30 years. My grandfather farmed and my great-grandfather farmed. What are you going to tell me, boy, that you know anything more than I do? Kind of like that today, ain't it? Yeah. All right. So they had to earn their stripes, and we did it by demonstrations. And whether it's canning, whether it's whatever, the with and the without, the consequences. Now, we're going to go back to a time there's no roads. This is the number one limitation we had of reaching communities. Communities were isolated. There's no roads. There's mud roads and dirt roads. They're isolated. There is no electricity in this state, probably to the 1930s, and some of the Indiana people would probably tell you, some of you didn't get electricity to the late 30s. Electricity is not there. There's no indoor water. Manual labor. Everything is by the people's muscles and brains. 20 cents an hour, and science and research was new. These men and women will hit these farms as we begin to get more and more agents. They would make 400 or 500 farm visits every year. And people said, you know what, they just add that to their reports to make it look good. But Purdue was actually reading through the reports. It's just incredible the amount of time Purdue was doing. And this was common across the state. And so we would do we would put up these signs. And so which pile would you like? You don't even have to be an ag, do you, ma'am? Which pile, if normally the bigger the pile, the better whatever they're showing me, right? And you can see here, so what are they trying to show? What are we trying to show here? Production. Don't need data. We use science. The science is coming out of the university. And we know as extension people, when we did these tests, we knew what the results were. And when we set up those tests, we knew it. And so we had our demonstrators, which we always hired. We always took the best farmers, the best homes, just like today. You ever notice where those signs are at? You don't see those signs of seed company, chemical companies. It's always in the best farmers. We wanted to take out the latest technology. Back then, it was tiles. It was tiles. I actually met a guy who used one of these. It was just a wonderful story he told me. We were promoting technology. That's what we were doing, right? Now, those technologies of that day obviously have changed. Most of them not around, but we still do tiling. We were trying to solve problems in the southern part of the state. Actually, Jeffrey, around your part, we have a lot of erosion, and that old southern part is eroded land. And we were teaching people how to build these dams that would actually catch the soil and fill in over time. Nothing spectacular until we hit this. Everything is brand new. There is no lime, there's no fertilizer, there's no nothing. It's all new. So the agent is teaching this guy, is your soil acid? Is it sweet or acid? If your soil is too acid, you can't grow crops, specifically alfalfa and clover. It's all livestock. So we convinced these people they need lime. This is how they got the lime. They had buggies. Now, if you own the train, you know, right? That train ain't sitting there all for 2 days, right? So you had to come get it. In this case, ma'am, they needed 4 tons of lime per acre. My wagon carries, I think, 1 ton. I'm still working on that. That meant I had to make 4 trips for every single acre. No roads. So you know if you live more than 4 or 5 or 6 miles away, wasn't going to happen. This just shows you unloading these rail cars and loading them on these animals here. And so Extension came up with the idea of working with their Farm Bureau that what we would do is have these permanent places full of lime. So as the men came into town, sir, with their horse and buggy, they would load up and take a load out. Solving the problems differently. Then we said, man, what about all those other people? Indiana is blessed with lots of lime. So what they did was pulverizers. These guys would have pulverizers, and they would actually take the lime off the ground, beat it up, put it into a pile, and then they would spread it. And then the researchers showed us way back then that you could actually apply lime in the winter, ma'am, and to have that effect in the spring. Why was that such an important? We do that today and we don't even think about it. Why is that important? What am I doing in the winter? I'm not as busy. I'm going to spread my time out. Okay? You had a lot of obstacles. If you just think of this in the field that you're in, it doesn't make a difference what it is. There are many answers to the same question, but how do we help that one person who's asking us? And so the object was that if I could do that, I could raise this forage to feed these animals. But you know what? Wasn't going to work. Anybody here are soybean people? Anybody here work with soybeans? What was soybeans? Is it Kansas? Yeah. Soybeans came in for what reason?
Livestock feed.
Hog feed for him. For us, soybeans could grow in more acid soil. So the soybeans came in so I can grow it as a hay crop. Later it would become an animal feed like it is today. Folks, some of these crops came in that we picked up on it. And again, there's different ways of solving the problems. And here is the hay crop. This is one of my favorite pictures. Here they're going to take the beans off to do for feed. Can you see how they're powering their separator, Billy? Isn't that cool? Inventive, ingenuity, duct tape. One of the things that they had back then, and again, we'll see all across the board, one of the things was we did things because we've always done it. Isn't that right, sir? And today, we've always done it like that. How do you get people to change, correct? You think about it. Ma'am, what toothpaste do you use? Why? And you've been using Crest for forever. And I bet that Crest toothpaste is in the same spot every morning. Yes, if you were a rat, you would be easy to kill. Now, we all do that. It's nothing unusual. So, We knew through research, and this word research, that when farmers planted their corn that came out of the corn bins, out of the cribs, 40% of it was dead before they even planted it. A kernel is a living, breathing thing. So we're going to have to overcome some of the skepticism. Instead of picking the corn right here and leaving it out for the winter, we wanted you to go in and pick the ears, certain ears at certain heights. And you can see here we're doing a lot of the demonstrations on the farm looking at corn. Boy, farmers didn't like that at all. They didn't believe it, sir. And so we had to prove that, right? So what we said was, for ½ cent an ear, we will test your ear. So what they did, every ear you would take off the kernels, and you would actually test them to see did they germinate or not, at what percentages. And roughly 35 to 40% of the ears were dead. And here he's actually reading them. And they know that if that was a good ear, they knew what number it was, and they could give that ear back to the farmer so that farmer could plant it. There's no seed corn at this time. It's all done by hand. That was extension. And then the hybrids would come in at Purdue in the late 20s. And so this is nothing spectacular, but the hybrids are coming in. And we love the competition. Who best to teach, ma'am? Who best to teach the facts? You or somebody else? Who do people listen to? The other farmers, and we're going to say other home ec people. I mean, I use farmers, but the whole shebang, correct? And so what we did, we had these 5-acre contests. Average yields were about 30 bushels an acre. These guys here could get 80, 90, and the magic number was 100. That was when you won awards and got medals. But you can see here, it was also dealing with strawberries, tomatoes, onions, cantaloupes, and all that one. These men and women were faced with horrible diseases in livestock. We had hog cholera. And so the agent became the go-to person on how to deal. They were actually almost like the veterinarian, and they were trying to prevent the spread of this disease. So we fed the animals. We taught you how to feed them. We wanted to make sure that these animals were raised, don't have a lot of drugs. And so, sir, you know that if animal has worms, what does that do to them? It weakens them. And so a lot of these worms existed in the soil, and so we're teaching people sanitation. Can you imagine today? He would say, this is a USDA veterinarian, he traveled the state working with Extension, and he would say, if you got some runt pigs, bring them on in. Now, if you're that runt pig, ma'am, that was not good news. And what he did was, he would cut them open and show people these things are just full of worms. That's why they're runts. Okay, now, I saw you make your face, but I bet once you saw those worms wiggling in there, wouldn't you be more apt to give them a vaccine, a dewormer? You betcha. And then we try to do people with economics, trying to get your ton of hogs, 2 tons of hogs within a certain time. And again, extension people bringing these growers here, they're fixing to sell these at a sale, and he's telling them why these animals are going to bring money and why some of them are not. As we talked about, God, these reports are awesome. This has created a whole book that I'm working on now. It's just incredible what these guys had to do and gals. World War I came along, probably made extension more than anything else. Did you know what won World War I? Food. The Europeans are destroyed. Their homes are destroyed. Their farms are destroyed. The lead person in England says, United States, you need to double, triple your food. If we don't have food, we're going to lose the war. Forget the military. So they came back and they said, Extension, we want 20% more wheat. We want 20% more hogs. We want 20% more. And you can see some of the pork production. I love this because we all look for those P's, right? Don't we all do that? We like to get those same letters and so he had it figured out: pork production, patriotic, and profitable. And if you didn't do it, you're going to help the Kaiser. So when in doubt, just shame them. Now, the ladies in this particular time period, wheatless wheat, the wheat we wanted to give to the soldiers and to other people. And so that the ladies in home ec began to make their breads and things without wheat. That was their patriotic chore. One of my favorite pictures, and I would have it for the book, except it's just a hair out of focus. Sugar was short. So what we're going to do is help the honey people to sell their product. I noticed the candy I got, not this one, but the little bag of stuff is from Indiana honey. Honey was a cheap sugar substitute, and what he's showing here is these bees have got a horrible disease called foul brood. Still exists today. The only way to take care of them was to burn them once you found it. What I like about that picture, that is, I believe, a smoker. You ever watch them smoke the bees? Put them to sleep, kind of? Now that little boy, he don't care about nothing. I wish I could meet this little fella, because you know what he's thinking, right? Oh, if I could put my hands on that, the things that I can do. We don't have a lot. I mean, people are trying to, and again here, once we found them, then the only way to cure it was to destroy it by burning it. During that time, rats lived on the farms by the millions. Extension would have rat campaigns. We gave out free chemicals. And we actually had contests. Can you see them just holding on to them? I've got some that's getting scanned now. They've taken the side of the barn, and it's kind of like they drew a picture with dead rats to make their point. Oh, it's really good. But every rat cost them $2, is what Extension said. Messing up their grain, fouling up stuff. And so, wouldn't think of it today, but boy, that was big news. Then after the war, the farmers had done very well. Extension had met its obligation. We delivered the food. After the war, the government said, thank you. They walked away. Overproduction. What happened? Prices dropped. You might not know it. I did not know it. After 1919, the farmers are in a depression 10 years before the Big Depression. I did not know that. So now Extension has got to try to make things go back to the pre-war. How much can I invest? How much do I make with no cash? After the war, no labor. It's the roaring 20s, correct? You've seen the booze is flowing, prosperity is big, all the labor is going to the cities to work. Farmers could not buy the labor. So what did we do? Well, these were new technologies. These are called self-feeders. It's kind of like being at a buffet line, right? And loading up and going back as much as you want. Then they figured out, through the research, again, all this is already proven science, which is cool. Through the research, they would actually grow soybeans and corn together, intermix it, not for harvesting by people. You would let the hogs run through. It was called hogging off. All your states did it. This way, I did not need people to take care of them. These animals would push over the corn, eat the beans, and if you've ever seen hogs, them suckers will eat anything. Isn't that right, ma'am? And when they basically, Louisiana, Texas, you got problems with wild hogs, right? Do they not eat everything there is? They destroy environments, do they not? Well, they do. They eat, I mean, there is nothing left. There's no tree, for other wildlife, that is. And we even have hunting. We can actually hunt them now, right? And there's no season. You can hunt them until what? Till you're tired of hunting them. Because as soon as you quit, there's another 1,000 that needs to be. These things, but that's why these animals could go through and clean everything. Now, that brings us up to some changes here. So everything was done on horses and mules. There's no labor. So what Extension did, we call them the big hitch. we would take multiple horses and we would show the farmers how to hook these horses up so that I could pull bigger implements, sir. So instead of needing maybe, I think there's only 5, but if I had 6 and 2, that would be 3 more people to do it. What I could do is hook them all together and only have one person to do it. Efficiency. And you can see here what they're trying to do with some of these bigger teams, and here are the lines of people coming out to these field days, these demonstrations. Very important. Well, at this time, tractors are coming in. A horse could do things cheaper than a tractor. But people were interested in tractors because we had no labor. The horse supply was going down. And so we'd actually have a big show, and we would bring these thousands of people in to look at these tractor demonstrations. And you can see here that over time, I've got horses and tractors both working. And then I'm only into the 1930s, so I don't know when one replaces, but I think already we're seeing we don't have enough horses on the farms. I'm already seeing the decline in the 1930s. But there for a while, they were side by side. And obviously, if you got all this equipment, Purdue, show us how to repair this stuff. We don't have the money. We're in a depression. Nobody made fruit. Everybody had orchards, but nobody produced anything, insects and diseases. And so Extension, through the research, came back and said, you know, if you'd spray these trees, you could get some apples, and you could sell those apples at a pretty good price. And so farmers did not have enough money to buy their own spray equipment, so they went in collectively, and they were community sprayers, and everybody paid their part, and now we're beginning to get fruit that we never had before. Amazing. After World War I, there's no money. Extension is trying to do like we often do, is trying to get people to change when it takes some kind of cash. Can you see these chickens? In the state of Indiana, chickens, eggs, and dairy milk is what saved our farms during the 1920s. What Extension here is doing is teaching people, if you had a flock, ma'am, of chickens, let's say you had a flock and 150 birds. Eggs were 40 cents a dozen. You had a whole flock of chickens. Are all those chickens laying? And the ones that aren't laying, they're just eating food for nothing. Correct? When you heard about a chicken in the pot, that's where they came from. So, what the researchers had done is showed us and taught us that we could go out and do the teaching, how to look at a bird and tell if she was laying or not. Skin color and other things. We don't need to go into that. People didn't believe it. Said, you can't do that. So how would you, people say, you can't do that. That's a good bird. Look, that's a healthy looking bird. How would you prove to somebody that that bird ain't laying? Actually, she got it right. So what you do is take all those birds that you didn't want, and roughly 35% of the birds were not laying eggs. They were just eating food. You take those birds, you put them in a separate pen, you feed them the same demonstration, and what did you see? Hardly no eggs. So in this way, you could put the food that you were giving to the ones that were producing eggs, and then they were going to the market, helping the bottom line. Now, women were the primarily ones that owned the poultry until we started learning that you could make lots of money off of it. And that's when the men scooted in and said, we want a piece of that action. This lady here had moved her flock of hens to where she was making 200 eggs. It was an average of 200 eggs per bird per year, as compared to 40. And it's nothing but housing, feed, and those things. Dairy was the same thing. This is what your dairies looked like back then. A dairy was 6 cows. Any of you go to Fair Oaks? That put us on, we have one duck farm. What are we, Indiana guys, gals, what are we dairy-wise in the state, in the country? Anybody know? I bet that one farm put us on the map. Back then, it only had 6 cows, 8 cows. And the guy would milk them, no pasteurization. You just pumped the milk, and then you took it to town. The problem was, milk had tuberculosis in it. And Extension got very heavily involved in this tuberculosis. What you did was you gave the animal a shot, and if she reacted, she had TB. The home economics people were so mad that this milk was going into the school for these kids that they began to put pressure on the system to change. And so this was one that was very unpopular back then, because the agents, Jeff, had to be on the side of, I'm going to say common sense, reason, whatever it is, in my way. Instead of focusing on the guys that were arguing about this extra cost, then TB was important, and they were on the side that all these herds had to get tested. By the way, if it was found to have TB, it went to the slaughterhouse. People said, that cow looks fine. You can't tell them this milk. And so what we did was we took people to the slaughterhouses so they can see these TB cows to show that these shots worked. And again, very uncomfortable. Anybody here with the work with what I still call them the home ec clubs, the county home ec clubs? I know my partner here does, yeah. And I call them the ladies. So when you work with them, back in those days, Purdue would send out a specialist on clothing, food, and all that stuff, and you trained 1 or 2 people in every group, and then they went back to their clubs and did the training. Do we still do that? So the lady shook her head no in the blue shirt, so blue dress. So you try to teach everything, right? You try. But back then we couldn't get to everybody, so we used these volunteers to be able to deliver that information. People were making their own dresses, dress forms. Isn't this cool? We're teaching people how to to store their fruits and vegetables in a barrel. There's no electricity, folks. And so here we're telling them with pieces of paper how we covered up the box and how we keep it cool. I thought this was rare, except that I just picked up another one yesterday doing the same thing here. And so we would have the ladies out there taking a look at that one. And again, I figured it might not show up. The point was not they're trying to do what to eat, what's proper to eat, what's nutritious, how do I blend the foods together to get my nutrients. And then the ladies would have their achievement day, which they would bring them all in and celebrate some of their achievement that they had today. Do you know where the school lunch program came from? From my generation, it's always been around. Did you know? The home ec ladies. They said that these kids back then, and I got plenty of surveys now, the kids were malnourished. And so what they wanted for these kids to do is to have milk in the school and have school lunches. Now the school lunches would have been hot soup. I mean, it's not like we have today. But actually the home ec ladies were doing a lot of the serving of the lunches, making of the lunches, so that these kids could make it through the day, the kids that were hungry. Again, we're looking at the 1920s, which is neat because they talked about having to buy jars and straws for the kids. Like today, right? Teachers today still buy supplies and stuff. We were very involved with schools way back then, 1920s, 1930s. We actually were the ones that developed the curriculum. It was thought that in Indiana, most kids would go back to the farm. Whether you're a boy or a girl, you would go back to the farm so that these kids needed some knowledge. I don't know about, that's a consolidated school. Does that look plain to you or what? Talk about a sterile environment. But what he's teaching these kids, both the girls and the boys, is how to pick good corn to plant. We knew that we had difficulty teaching the moms and dads, so we would teach the kids. Any of you got kids? Your kid ever come home and said, teacher said that ain't good to do? All the time. They were doing that back then. They understood that rule. So you can see here, these small kids, one-room schoolhouses populated the state. You can see here, again, this ability to pick good corn and to do other things. the older kids going out into the fields and learning it by hands-on. 4-H began to develop. A lot of it's in livestock, and you can see here the folks with their livestock, chickens, 4-H clubs. And we depended on, back then, the volunteers of home economic, and again, the home economic types of folks. They would lead the charge. And these volunteers were important, folks. I can't tell you how much, I thought it was something now. I volunteer in our county. I serve on the extension board, and I do the supervision of young kids in terms of giving class, being able to speak in public speaking. And I thought, I didn't realize that this volunteer stuff went way back, at the very beginning, because there's not enough of a mass of people. And so what we would do is have the volunteers would teach these boys in a pig club what they were supposed to do. We would teach this case, these two young ladies, how to pick wild fruit and process it. Any of you ever used a stove like this or seen one? I had a lady explain to me how this worked. Man, it was pretty elaborate. And so this is, again, learning how to cook, to bake, learning how to sew, learning how to reuse things was the big to do. And then these kids went they went to every club member's place, and they got to see what that man, that girl, or that boy was doing at the club, so they could learn from each other. Well, we don't do that in 4-H. Anybody here work in 4-H? What's the whole point of 4-H? Oh, yeah, get rid of all that nonsense. What is it? Hands-on, learn something, life skills, and then at the end you got to do something with it, right? Now at mine, when I get all these parents, we have about 50 kids, and these kids have to learn how to speak. I said, let's get this out in the open, let's get this over with. If you want blue ribbons, how many of you want blue ribbons? I got whole boxes of them. If you want 10, 15, 20, I'll give them to you. I'm not here for blue ribbons. If you want them, just tell me afterwards. And of course, none of them do, right? And what's really nice is the kids really can't get any help, because when you're in front of a group of judges and people, mom and dad ain't there, are they? They help with the posters. So you get ready for the competition. And so here we get in the pig. When they talk about a hog in heaven, does that little fellow look like he don't know what's at the end of the line? You can see the different clubs that we had. These are the kids had to have a 1-acre corn club, and they competed. Again, you look at a lot of it is production oriented. And then these young men and women would win awards for doing. Does anybody here, and I'm asking the question because I'm going to take this talk out to, let's just say, people who, some of them lived during this era. What is the deal with this? Do anybody know what this comes from? Because it appears in all of the pictures. And I'm thinking it's probably a Sears, it's something you would order. Does anybody? The pattern, I'm sorry, yes, sir. And this showed up on men, on boys, on a lot of the overalls. I'm guessing it's a Sears type of deal. By the way, the women here during this time could go do anything they wanted to. Most of them would do the cooking, sewing. They also did the livestock. They could do whatever they wanted to as a project. This lady here won all kind of stuff. I don't have the slide yet. It's coming. She's also on the judging team. Would have been a rare thing. Now, I understand that women during the 1920s did not have the same opportunities. I understand it. But I'm not here to address that. I'm saying is, as a 4-H'er, I could do whatever I wanted to. Nobody seemed to have any problems. And then you would win. These counties were very, very pleased to what their ribbons and how these young men and women did in their counties. It doesn't seem like much, but if you think about what does this represent, ladies? Huh? It's a wardrobe. Everything was handmade from everything they had laying around. I learned yesterday when they went to get in to make these sacks to make their clothing, the lady was telling me that they always had to send the father to remind him 14 times, Look at the pattern, because these sacks had different patterns on them. Get the same one, because I'm trying to make underwear, dresses, everything, T-shirts. And so this young lady here is things that she's made, and canning, those kind of things. I thought this was just a beautiful picture. It's debating whether it's going to be on the cover or not. There's some things here I love to learn about hairstyles. There's all kind of things. So here you can see they've done quite well. And these kids learned how to do well. They learned how to compete. Then we celebrated their accomplishments. This, to me, is a great picture. Can you see what their benches are? Somebody just cut some trees, rolled them down, and put on the planks. Then we had the camps. And so this is in the 20s. We got these camps in the 30s. So our leaders would come to these camps, and they would learn different things. Here, they're learning how to kill a chicken and to dress it. Can you imagine if you killed the chicken at a camp today? Wouldn't happen, would it? I'm sure there's an HR policy on that too. Now, I can't blow this one up, and I've got to work on it. Can you see something, even with these lights, can you see something unique? This Native American was traveling the camps teaching these kids about his way of life. He also had his, I'm going to say wife, I'm not sure, because the term was squaw. We use the word squaw in Indian, obviously, in times of change. But they were going around at these camps doing that. Folks, I hope what you saw in these pictures, extension is, and this is the part that I think connecting the past to the present. I've heard it already through some of the speakers. If we lose this, there is no extension. There are lots of people that do what we do, or at least bits and pieces. Is that correct? There's a lot of voices out there. We are still people-oriented. We are trying to still find practical solutions, whatever that might be. And whether it's Mr. Popcorn, I'm thinking of the other areas working, Mr. Popcorn, Have a Healthy Baby. Did you guys ever do the Have a Healthy Baby? Was that a very effective program? Had to do with teen pregnancies and the whole shebang, right? Very looking for practical solution. We still offer advice. Called the EPA person Monday. Some guy asked me about fuel tanks. And EPA's changed the rules. So I called EPA out of Chicago. I said, how are you going to answer this? She says, it's for a farm? I said, yes, ma'am. She says, I can't. What do you mean you can't? She says, no, I can't. We haven't got our marching orders from Washington. We've been waiting for 6 months. How am I supposed to answer this farmer's question? Boy, that's not, we want to be there to answer people's questions. We still rely on volunteers. And I'm going to add one thing to this discussion. We are backed by research. Is that true? David, what's your specialty? Agriculture engineering. And you know you guys have done all the research that you give to us, correct? And we rely on you to tell me. I'm not going to read what you're telling me. We don't do that. But you tell me, Fred, if you do this is the outcome. Right? And so that's what we still do. Folks, we're research-based, but it's also this experience. If you're just strictly research-based, how can you do your job? What's the experience? Where's the experience come from, ma'am? Huh? Yeah, where do you get your experience in extension? Because remember, these first agents, by doing it. And I learned from my partner here, we did a publication years back, that you actually do the canning demonstrations and all that stuff. So when you get up in front of a group, you know how to do it. If you're a field agent, you ought to be out there with your farmers. I go spray. I love spraying. I love killing things. So I'll go out there and spray a yard. I'll kill cockroaches. I do all kinds of things. Why? Get experience. I can't do the jobs that these men and women do. I can't do them, but I can walk in their shoes best I can. I was inside of a fertilizer tank. I was learning how this fertilizer eats this metal, and I'm trying to figure out how to check the metal before it breaks, before I release this into the environment. So I had to crawl into it, David. It's an engineering thing. And then I got to see the pits, and then I had to ask, well, then what's the measurement? What's good and bad? And do I have any tools that will allow me to look at it? I'm learning. Folks, I hope that if you're at the university, you got to get out. Because anymore, the people we're dealing with are expecting research and some knowledge of what they do. We still do the local needs, I hope. We still connect with communities. You heard both of our leaders talk about that. And boy, it's time-consuming. These guys and gals had no life back then. And by the way, we don't either. That is a family. That is one of the ages is kids. Extension is a very difficult job to be. So do any of you teach family kinds of things? Do you even practice what you preach? No, you don't. It's horrible. Yeah, it is horrible. So we spend I do about 300 talks a year around the country and do my field stuff and do all that. All your time is gone. So part of that is having spouses that appreciate it. It actually causes us a problem with some of our new people as we get them. Now, if we do not change, this is the last slide, if we do not change, ma'am, then we will not adapt, right? We'll no longer be relevant. What I'm saying is these things don't change. That's our genetic makeup. That is who we are. But we have to. We have to adapt to new technologies. I don't care if it's food science, if it's farming, if it's 4-H, if it's the eyeball test on, sheep. It's new things we have to learn. We're having to become more specialized, at least I am. I've got to know more about the subject matter than I've ever had to know. I see things like this happening: obesity, exercising, diabetes. I think our extension system is being asked to deal more with that. Is that correct? At least that's my perception. So those of us in agriculture, we still have to deal with bigger farmers and stuff. But you see this, more of these issues are coming: bullying, literacy, money. Bullying, I guess, would that be a number one extension thing right now? I mean, to me, that's on the topic of bullying. Programs for aging population. One of my favorite ones is you go to Tippecanoe County. Anybody here from Tippecanoe County? Well, that's good. I'll have to remind them since we're doing their reviews in a few weeks. They have a program for ladies, and they're probably in their 90s. And go out and work with those ladies. You'll do it one time. And so what they're doing is it's a program to walk, to move the muscles. They have light, what do you call them? Not dumbbell. The weights. They got weights to be able to move. They are stretching. Those are the kind of programs to me that are very, very effective for what they're trying to do. You see the push right here to increase diversity. And diversity could be whether it's the Amish, Hispanic, depending on your state, African Americans. It can be the Hmong farmers. It can be all kinds of people, but we're being asked to do more. It might be do more with small farmers and less with the big ones. Or, Joel, add small farmers to your list. So diversity takes many different shapes. And boy, this is the last two. We're having to compete with many voices. And we have to adapt. We can't throw out what brought us here, but we do have to change, and we try to remain balanced. Probably the hardest thing that I do is right there. It is very difficult to get upset with people. I don't mean upset. You listen to all this noise, and sometimes you understand when this engineer is talking, how do I know he's on the right track? And I got another engineer. It's difficult to remain balanced, which is why I look for people that I trust to help me. And I'll leave you with this one. We've got 100 years of people being in these jobs, Jeff. Who did you replace there in your county? And who did he replace? Do you know? So you got me two before you. Can you go back any more? So you carry me probably halfway back to extension. Somewhere in the background is another group of men and women who carried us to that one, to you. And now what you're doing is you're on a dirt road. One of your specialties were working with gangs. So that's one of his specialties, and people coming out of prison, reacclimating with their parents and all the kind of gangs and those kind of things. So you're setting a new path for somebody else to follow. And so I'm very appreciative of what Extension has done, all these men and women for 100 years. They've given us a chance to actually help people, which ultimately, David, that's what we do. We help people. It ain't any harder than that, is it? It's not any harder. You can juice that up any way you want, but we're here to help people. All right. Any questions, comments, disagreements, agreements? If you disagree, folks, I don't care. Agreement. I tell that it's open. I like it when I have disagreements.
Just a comment.
Yes, ma'am. Now, I think they want you because they're taping this. Yep, you have to come.
Well, then maybe not.
Yes.
So.
All right, hang on a second. Come over here. You got it?
Good. So several of us from Idaho are working on a program. It'll be our 4th year called Scholarship Workday. We're talking to kids about going back to school and importance of higher ed. So in 1899 in Purdue, they did a program called Why Should a Young Man Get Higher Education? I wonder if I could have the notes, the speaker's notes from then, and any curriculum that could help us along with our program.
I do the joke, not you. If you notice, nothing changes. The technology changes. Nothing really. It's people business, generation to generation. All right. Any questions, folks? Before I turn it over to Jeff, you ready, Jeff? Any questions or comments, folks? I hope you laughed a little bit. Appreciate it.